Hi, my name is Lana Kronk, and this is a presentation over my action inquiry project. I want to start off by sharing my purpose. When I started this class, I knew that I was going to have to investigate a problem that I had in my room. And honestly, choosing which problem I wanted to focus on was the biggest struggle because I'm constantly wanting to evolve and become a stronger teacher, and I knew I had a lot of growth area. So, what I ended up choosing was I've noticed over the past few years more and more students come into my classroom and don't know how to struggle. They don't like that icky feeling inside when they don't know how to do something instantly. And so that productive struggle, which is how we as learners become stronger, they weren't willing to do. So was observing some behavior. I would see heads down. I would see students who sometimes would cry or get mad or frustrated. And I knew that they didn't have the coping strategies to deal with hard situations. And so I knew that my goal was going to be to try to help them overcome their struggle by giving them the strategies they needed. When I was doing my action inquiry project, I knew that it was a summer course, so I wouldn't be able to dive into the actual project part of it, the inquiry part of it, I guess. And so instead, I knew that I was going to have to do a lot of research in order to compensate for what I was not going to be able to observe in my classroom. But when you're doing your AIP, make sure you realize that a lot of what the investment is in the practice within your classroom. You need to be able to know your kids and know what they need in order for this project to go well. Some of the common themes that came up in my research was especially in my research was growth mindset. Carol Dweck's work was in everything I did. I also focused a lot on grit and resiliency, and Duckworth was the one who kind of introduced the idea of grit, which was that ability to bounce back when you have encountered failure. And it's a very important skill when you're a learner. Student ownership, autonomy came up a lot. Technology, goal setting was common. Engagement, motivation, which went a lot with student ownership. And how teachers respond to need. So teacher support and the relationships with students came up quite often. I set three kind of plans in place to tackle and decide which one would be best for my classroom. So I knew that when it came to like reading stamina and grit and pushing through our classroom curriculum, most of my students struggled to read for more or about 10 minutes at a time. 10 minutes was the ideal goal. Most of my students would really read for only a couple of minutes at a time. And then they would become either bored or frustrated or overwhelmed and they would give up. So I know that goal setting is very important for students. Tons of my research came through about goal setting. And so I thought I would try to do some personalized goals with Google Docs. And so in the Google Docs, I would have a couple different pages, some reflection pages, some goals. First one would be goal setting, some self-reflection pages, some data collection pages that students could use throughout a 4-week period to try to gain growth in their goal. And students would set their goal, maybe it would be to read 75,000 words, or maybe it would be to read 2 different genres of books. So the students would set their goals, and I would model and show them how to make markers to get like kind of checks off their goal. And so the first one was setting goal setting with Google Docs. The other one I have actually kind of dipped into before was Plan 2, and it was rewarding effort with badges. So we use Schoology as our learning platform, and Schoology offers badges. They could be attendance badges, kindness badges, but I had an idea of using badges to obtain independent reading goals by creating a generic set of some would say I read 25,000 words, some would say I read a sci-fi book. And for every time a student made growth towards their goal, maybe a check off their goal list, they would be rewarded with a badge. And the badges would be positive reinforcement for the attempts they made at their goals. My final idea, my plan three, was to use something that I've been wanting to use for a few years. It's called Classcraft, and it's an online gamified reward system. It ties in really nicely with PBIS. Basically, every student has an avatar that they have. The avatars can do things, play games, interact with each other, and so forth. And they can level up depending on performance that they may use. So maybe if they were kind to a classmate, you could give points and they could like level up for what they did. But I would use this in the reading world, and I would take that every time they did something, again, towards their reading goal, then they could level up their character. Overall, I decided to go with plan number one. It was the most reasonable for my classroom, and it had been something that I had been wanting to work towards anyways. We had already done something similar to this with paper in our data binders that we keep, but I knew that I could do a lot more with it on Google Docs. So I decided to go and implement plan number one, or that's what I would do in the fall. So this is a rough idea of what my plan would look like. I've included the lesson plans in my milestone paper, but this would be an overall view. So my goal week one would be to start setting our SMART goals. These are actually the SMART goals we would share at conference time as well. So I'd introduce the idea of setting SMART goals. I would model doing these goals with students. So I will have a reading goal just like the students do. I'll have the same exact worksheets, or sorry, the same exact Google Sheets that they have. And in this week, we would also, after starting to create our goals, we would peer edit goals. In week two, we would track our data. I would again model how to take a really big goal and to chunk it into pieces. If my goal is to read a chapter book that is 300 pages, I would show them that over a 4-week period, we would divide the number of pages by how many weeks to know how many pages we need to read a week. So I'd show them how to do that, meet with them to help them do that individually. Then throughout the week, we'll practice some of those reading skills that we need, and that keeping our mind on our books, we'll do some self-monitoring strategies. So for example, tallying every time we're off task. If we catch ourselves thinking about something else, we put a tally mark, and practice refocus strategies to get back into the text. And then at the end of the week, they would do a self-reflection to see what strategies they ended up using throughout the week. Week three would be a conferencing week. There would be a lot of small group rotation, and my goal would be to meet with students to help them check in on where they're at with their goal. What can I do to help them? Having conversations about their reading with each other and with me. And then I would like to do a reading interest or inventory survey that assesses what kind of books they're interested in. Normally, a lot of people do this at the beginning, but I really want to give my students a chance to experiment with books before they can tell me for sure what kind of reader they are. A lot of students think, for example, that they are readers. I can listen to music while I read, or I can read when it's super, super dark in the room. And oftentimes that's not true. And I want to give them some time to practice in the classroom on what feels comfortable for them as readers, and then survey to see if that is actually an effective strategy for them. Finally, in week four, I want to assess where they're at. A quarter is about 8 weeks, and so a 4-week goal would get us to a halfway mark of our goal setting. So this here, students would monitor again how they're doing, how on track they are with their reading. We will have practiced inner dialogue by this time. We would have practiced reading, writing, and talking about our novels. So this is our check-in. We're going to do a halfway, midway check-in to see where we're at in our reading. So this is my plan. Again, I want to give you a tip as you dive into this project is just remember that you know your kids more than anyone else. You're the best researcher for your kids. So the things that you put in place, the reading you do and the strategies you put in place, you know your kids. Just be consistent in collecting the data and recording what you're observing in your students. When I was thinking about technology, I wanted to make sure that I was choosing a technology that was going to actually benefit students, and I wasn't choosing technology just to choose it. And so when I thought about Google Docs, I thought about how accessible it is for all of my students. Setting goals on Google Docs means that they can put their information in instantly, even if they're at home, and I can give them feedback instantly, even if I'm at home. Google Docs was a great liaison between I'm doing stuff at school, I'm doing things at home, and students can share their goals with a peer buddy as well without having a physical data binder that either can get lost or crumpled. It's very easy to hold on to this technology, and I think it was going to be the best option for my students. When I was thinking too about my former approach when it came to action research, oftentimes I'm guilty or very guilty of just going on the internet and like, here's my problem, I'm going to Google it or go to Pinterest and try to solve it. Um, and I realized that when you're on Pinterest or you're on Google, a lot of the things that are coming up are, um, let's call them fads. They're problems and solutions that are technology based that don't necessarily resonate with your classroom. They're just what's most up to date. And so looking at our problem here, I knew that if I was just going to try to find a goal setting problem or a growth mindset problem, that I might run into a situation where I was just looking at modern trends and not necessarily going through the action research process, which is the most important part. We need to look at each step in action research because just looking up answers is not how we solve problems. We need to go through and we need to know our kids and we need to collect data and we need to try to solve the problem with strategies that are research based. So it's more than just looking up answers. With my project, there was a lot of good and bad, or strengths and weaknesses. Some of my strengths that I had were that, again, when I'm looking at instant, Google Docs allowed for that. It also allowed for Google Read and Write to work, which is really important for my students. Loved that. Again, also doesn't get lost easily. Some of the weaknesses is that the way that I have it set up is that it's very much a interactive worksheet and not necessarily high-tech option. It's easy to follow and clear, which I like. However, it's not something that I would say goes above and beyond in the technology department. Um, when I also thought about one of the things that's hard is that it's not a tangible item, meaning that I would have to remind students often to get it out and to load up their document. My AIP tip number 4 is make sure that you're reflecting through this process. Learning is a cycle, and the most important step is the reflection piece because you don't know whether to continue with good strategies or bad strategies unless you reflect so that you can grow and make changes. And your AIP is the same way. You must reflect on the steps to make sure that when you continue the next AIP, that you're doing exactly that. You're reflecting, changing, and modifying. Overall, my AIP taught me a lot, especially about the research process. I was not one to dive into research, and overall, I felt really refreshed knowing that when I have an idea, my gut is telling me you need to make a change, you need to do something. And the AIP allowed me to dive into research and to take that information and apply it directly to my classroom, which is important. Sometimes teachers feel like they don't really have, they can rant and they can complain, but there's nothing they can do to solve their problem. I felt like if this was the fall semester, I would have had an amazing opportunity to meet and do things with students to help them become better readers. This is my AIP project. Thank you for watching. Have an awesome day.